Elena Vasquez stood outside the tall iron gates and looked up at the biggest house she had ever seen. The mansion was made of gray stone and had more windows than she could count. Beautiful gardens stretched out on both sides, with flowers that cost more than her monthly rent. She took a deep breath and pressed the buzzer. She was 43 years old and had been cleaning houses for rich families in Boston for 12 years. She knew how to work hard. She knew how to be quiet and invisible. She knew how to serve people who never looked at her face. But this house scared her. Everyone in the city knew about Richard Harrison. He was one of the richest men in America. His company built buildings all over the world. But people did not talk about his money. They talked about how cold and mean he was. They said he had fired 6 housekeepers in 2 years. They said he never smiled and never laughed. They said his heart was made of ice. Elena did not want to work for such a man. But she had no choice. Her daughter Sophia was in medical school and the tuition was due in 3 months. Elena had worked 2 jobs for years to save money, but it was not enough. When the cleaning agency called about this position, they told her the salary. It was 3 times what she earned now. 3 times. That money could change everything. So here she was, standing at the gates of a man who scared everyone. The gates opened slowly, and Elena walked up the long driveway. Her shoes made soft sounds on the stone path. The closer she got to the house, the bigger it seemed. She felt very small. A woman in a black suit opened the front door. She did not smile. "You must be the new housekeeper," the woman said. "I am Mrs. Chun, the house manager. Follow me." Elena followed her inside and stopped breathing for a moment. The entrance hall was like something from a movie. A huge staircase curved up to the 2nd floor. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Paintings in gold frames covered the walls. Everything was beautiful and cold at the same time, but Elena did not notice any of these things for long. Her eyes found something else. Something that made her heart stop. In the center of the living room, near the tall windows, stood a piano. But not just any piano. It was a Steinway concert grand, black and shining like a mirror. The most beautiful instrument Elena had ever seen. It probably cost more than she would earn in her entire life. She stopped walking. Her feet would not move. Her fingers began to shake at her sides. "Is something wrong?" Mrs. Chun asked. Elena forced herself to look away from the piano. "No, nothing. I'm sorry." They continued the tour of the house. Mrs. Chun showed her the kitchen, the dining room, the library, the many bedrooms. She explained the cleaning schedule, the rules, the expectations. Elena nodded and said yes to everything. But her mind kept going back to that piano. She had not touched a piano in 22 years. She had not let herself even look at one for too long. But this one called to her. It was like seeing an old friend she had left behind long ago. The end of the tour, Mrs. Chun led her back to the living room. And that is when Elena saw him for the first time. Richard Harrison stood by the fireplace. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. He wore an expensive suit and held a glass of whiskey in his hand. He did not say hello. He did not welcome her. He just looked at her like she was something he was trying to understand. "This is Elena Vasquez," Mrs. Chun said. "The new housekeeper." Richard nodded slowly. "How long have you been cleaning houses?" 12 years, sir," Elena answered. Her voice was steady, but her heart was beating fast. "The last 6 women did not last more than 4 months," Richard said. "I do not accept mistakes. I do not accept laziness. I do not accept excuses. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to the piano, and something changed in his face. A flash of pain crossed his eyes. Just for a second. Then it was gone. "That piano is never to be touched," he said. His voice was hard. "Never not to clean it. Not to move it. Not for any reason. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Elena said. She understood. Some things were too precious to touch. Some things held too many memories. Richard Harrison turned and walked away without another word. That night, Elena went home to her small apartment. She sat on her bed and thought about the piano. She thought about the way her fingers had wanted to reach out and touch the keys. She thought about the music that had been sleeping inside her. For more than 2 decades, she had buried that part of herself long ago. She had locked it away in a box and thrown away the key. She was not a musician anymore. She was a housekeeper. That was all, but as she closed her eyes to sleep, she heard music in her dreams. She heard the notes she used to play when she was young and full of hope. She heard the sound of everything she had lost. The next morning, she went back to the Harrison mansion and began her work. She cleaned the floors and washed the windows and dusted the shelves. She moved through the house like a ghost, quiet and invisible, but every time she walked past that piano, she felt its pull. Every time she saw those black and white keys, her fingers remembered. She did not know that Richard Harrison was watching her. She did not know that he noticed every time she paused near the piano. She did not know that he was already asking himself questions about his new housekeeper, questions that would change both of their lives forever. 1 week passed after that night in the living room. Elena went to work every day with fear in her heart. She waited for Richard to fire her. She waited for him to call her into his study and tell her to leave. But he did not. He acted like nothing had happened. He nodded at her in the mornings. He ignored her while she cleaned. Everything was normal, but Elena could not relax. She felt like something was coming. Something she could not see. She was right. It was a Thursday evening. The sun was setting and the mansion was painted in orange light. Elena was finishing her work for the day. She had cleaned every room, washed every dish, and made every bed. She was tired and ready to go home. She walked through the living room one last time to check if everything was perfect. The piano sat there as always, beautiful and untouched. Elena did not look at it. She had learned her lesson, but then she heard footsteps behind her. "Stop," Richard said. Elena turned around. Richard stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. His face was serious. His eyes were fixed on her. "Yes, sir?" Elena said. "Is something wrong?" Richard walked into the room slowly. He moved toward the piano and stood next to it. He put his hand on the shiny black wood and looked at Elena. "I have been thinking about you," he said. Elena's heart began to beat faster. "Sir, I have been watching you for 3 months. I see how you move through this house. I see how you stop near the piano. I see how your fingers move when you hear music." Elena opened her mouth to explain, but Richard held up his hand. "I know you are hiding something," he said. "You are not just a housekeeper. You know music. Real music. I can see it in your eyes." Elena felt trapped. She did not know what to say. For 22 years, she had kept her secret. She had told no one about her past. Not her husband before he left. Not her friends. Not even her daughter knew the whole truth. "Mr. Harrison, I do not know what you mean," she said. "I am just a cleaner. I clean houses. That is all I do." Richard shook his head. "You are lying. I can always tell when someone is lying. It is how I became successful in business." He pointed at the piano bench. "Sit down." Elena did not move. "Sir, I cannot. The rule says I am not allowed to touch the piano." "I am changing the rule," Richard said. His voice was cold and hard. "Sit down and play." Elena felt her face go white. Her hands began to shake. "I cannot play." "I told you I'm not a musician. I was just looking at the piano because it is beautiful. That is all." Richard walked closer to her. He stopped just a few feet away. His eyes were sharp like knives. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "I do not like lies. I do not like secrets. If you do not sit down at that piano and play right now, you are fired. You will pack your things and leave this house tonight. You will never come back." Elena felt tears building in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Harrison, I need this job. My daughter is in medical school. I have to pay for her education. If I lose this job, I cannot help her." "Then play," Richard said simply. "I cannot." Elena's voice broke. The tears started falling down her face. You do not understand. I have not played in 22 years. I cannot do it. Please do not ask me to do this. Richard did not move. His face did not change. 22 years, he repeated. That is a very specific number. That is not the answer of someone who never played piano. That is the answer of someone who stopped. Elena covered her face with her hands. He had caught her. He had found the crack in her armor. What happened 22 years ago? Richard asked. His voice was a little softer now. Elena shook her head. She could not speak. The memories were flooding back. The accident. The hospital. The doctor telling her that her right hand would never be the same. The dreams dying one by one like candles being blown out. Please, she whispered. Do not make me do this. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My wife made me promise something before she died. She made me promise that someone would play this piano again. Someone who really loved music. I have not been able to keep that promise. For 3 years, this piano has been silent. Elena looked up at him. There were no tears in his eyes, but she could see the pain there. He was not just being cruel. He was also suffering. I cannot play like I used to, Elena said quietly. Something happened to my hand. I am not the same person I was before. I do not care about perfection, Richard said. I just want to hear music in this house again. Elena looked at the piano. It sat there waiting for her. The keys were white and black, like they had always been. Like they had been when she was 17 and full of hope. Like they had been on the night everything changed. She thought about Sophia. She thought about the tuition money. She thought about all the years she had worked so hard to give her daughter a better life. If she walked away now, she would lose everything. Slowly, Elena walked to the piano. Her legs felt weak. Her whole body was shaking. She sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. She had not done this in 22 years. She had not let herself remember what it felt like. She had locked this part of herself away and tried to forget. But now, sitting here, she could not pretend anymore. She raised her hands and held them above the keys. She could feel Richard watching her. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. I do not know if I can do this, she whispered. Try, Richard said. Elena closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She thought about the girl she used to be. The girl who played piano like she was born to do it. The girl who believed that music was her future. Then she let her fingers fall onto the keys, and she began to play. 3 months passed, and Elena learned everything about the Harrison mansion. She knew which floors needed to be cleaned on which days. She knew how Mr. Harrison liked his coffee in the morning. She knew which rooms he used and which rooms stayed empty and dark. She also learned about the sadness that filled this house. Richard Harrison was a widower. His wife Margaret had died 3 years ago. Elena learned this not because anyone told her, but because she could see it everywhere. The house was like a museum for a woman who was gone. Margaret's reading glasses still sat on the table in the library. Her gardening gloves still hung by the back door. Her clothes still filled the closet in the master bedroom. Richard had not moved any of her things. It was like he was waiting for her to come back. The other workers whispered about it. They said Mr. Harrison had loved his wife more than anything in the world. When she got sick, he spent millions trying to save her. When she died, something inside him died too. That was why he was so cold now. That was why he never smiled. Elena understood this kind of grief. She knew what it felt like to lose something precious. There were strict rules in the house, and Elena followed all of them. The most important rule was about the piano. She was never to touch it. She dusted around it carefully, keeping her hands away from the keys. She polished the wooden legs, but never the top. She moved around it like it was a sleeping animal. She did not want to wake. The second rule was about the music room on the 3rd floor. That door was always locked. Elena was never to go inside. She did not know what was in there, and she did not ask. Some secrets were not meant to be discovered. The 3rd rule was the strangest one. No one was allowed to talk about Mrs. Harrison, not her life, not her death, not anything about her. This rule confused Elena at first. Usually, people wanted to talk about the ones they had lost. But Richard Harrison wanted silence. Elena followed all the rules. She did her job perfectly. Mr. Harrison never complained about her work. In fact, he barely spoke to her at all. He would nod when she entered a room and look away. She was invisible to him, just like she was invisible to all the rich people she had worked for. But something strange began to happen. Elena could not stop herself from humming while she worked. She had always done this. It made the time pass faster. The songs came out of her without thinking. And the songs were always classical music, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, the music of her past. One day, she was cleaning the dining room when she heard something from Mr. Harrison's study. It was music, a recording of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The notes floated through the house like ghosts. Elena stopped cleaning. She closed her eyes and listened. This piece had been one of her favorites when she was young. She had played it hundreds of times. Her fingers knew every note, every pause, every breath. Without knowing it, her hands began to move. They made small motions in the air, pressing invisible keys, playing a piano that was not there. When the music stopped, Elena opened her eyes, and she saw Richard Harrison standing in the doorway. He was watching her with those dark, sharp eyes. He had seen everything. Elena's face turned red. "I'm sorry, sir. I did not mean to stop working. I will finish right away." Richard did not say anything. He just looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. To that day, Elena noticed something different. Richard seemed to be watching her more often. She would be cleaning a window and feel his eyes on her back. She would be polishing the silverware and look up to find him standing in the doorway. He never said anything. He just watched. Elena tried to be more careful. She stopped humming. She kept her eyes away from the piano. She moved faster through the room so he would not catch her standing still. But one evening, something happened that she could not control. It was late, almost 9 o'clock. Elena had stayed to finish some extra cleaning because guests were coming the next day. The house was quiet and dark. She thought Mr. Harrison was in his study. She walked into the living room to check if everything was in order. The piano sat there in the moonlight, beautiful and silent. Elena stood looking at it for a long time. She missed music so much. She missed the feeling of keys under her fingers. She missed the way a melody could make her feel alive. For 22 years, she had denied herself this love. She had punished herself by staying away from pianos, but tonight she could not resist. She walked closer to the piano. Her heart was beating hard. She knew she was breaking the rules. She knew she could lose her job. But something pulled her forward. She stopped in front of the piano and raised her hand. She held it just above the keys. So close, just an inch away. She could almost feel the music waiting to come out. She did not touch the keys. She would never break that rule. But she closed her eyes and imagined. She imagined playing again. She imagined the notes flowing from her fingers. She imagined being the person she used to be. "I see you," a voice said behind her. Elena jumped and spun around. Richard Harrison stood in the shadows. His face was unreadable. He had been watching her the whole time. "Mr. Harrison," Elena said. Her voice shook. "I was not going to touch it. I promise. I know the rules. I was just looking. I am so sorry. Please do not fire me. I need this job. My daughter." Richard held up his hand. She stopped talking. He walked slowly toward her. His shoes made soft sounds on the wooden floor. He stopped in front of the piano and looked at it for a long moment. "You know music?" he said. It was not a question. Elena did not know what to say. She had kept her secret for so long. She had hidden it from everyone. "I used to," she whispered. "A long time ago." Richard turned to look at her. There was something different in his eyes now. Not anger. Something else. Something like curiosity. "My wife loved this piano," he said quietly. "She played it every day. After she died, no one has touched it. Not once in 3 years." Elena felt tears in her eyes. "I understand. Some things are sacred." Richard nodded slowly. He looked at her for a long time. Then he walked away, disappearing into the dark hallway. Elena stood alone in the living room. Her hands were still shaking. She had not been fired. But something had changed. She could feel it. She did not know what Richard Harrison was thinking. She did not know what he was planning, but she knew that her secret was no longer safe. The first note was wrong. Elena's finger hit the key too hard, and the sound rang out ugly and loud. She pulled her hands back like she had touched fire. Her face burned with shame. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I told you I cannot play anymore. I should not have tried." She started to get up from the bench, but Richard's voice stopped her. "Sit down," he said. "Try again." Elena looked at him. He was not angry. He was not laughing at her. He was just waiting. She sat back down. She looked at the keys. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely control them. 22 years of fear and pain and loss were sitting on her shoulders like stones. She tried again. This time, she started with something simple. Just a few notes. A scale that every piano student learns in their first lesson. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully. Some notes were good, some were bad. Her right hand was stiff and slow. The nerve damage from the accident had never fully healed, but she kept going, and then, without thinking, she began to play something else. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece she had loved when she was young. A piece she had planned to play at her first big concert. A piece she had not touched since the night her dreams died. The beginning was messy. Her fingers stumbled and slipped. She hit wrong notes and missed others completely. The music sounded broken, like a voice that had not spoken in years. But slowly, something began to change. Her fingers started to remember. Deep in her muscles, the memory was still there. It was buried under years of silence, but it was not gone. Her hands began to move faster. The notes became cleaner. The music began to flow. Elena forgot about Richard watching her. She forgot about her fear. She forgot about everything except the piano, and the music and the feeling of being alive again. She played like someone who was drowning and finally finding air. She played like someone who was finding a piece of herself that she thought was lost forever. She played with all the pain and all the love and all the years of longing that had built up inside her. The piece was 8 minutes long. When Elena played it as a young woman, it had been perfect. Every note in the right place. Every phrase shaped beautifully. Now it was different. There were mistakes. There were moments when her hand cramped and the music faltered. It was not perfect, but it was something more than perfect. It was real. It was honest. It was the sound of a broken heart still beating. When the last note faded into silence, Elena realized she was crying. Tears were streaming down her face and falling onto the keys. She had not cried like this in years. She had not let herself feel this much in years. She sat there with her head down, afraid to look up. Afraid to see Richard's face. Afraid of what he would say. The silence stretched out. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds, then she heard something she did not expect. Richard Harrison was crying too. Elena looked up in shock. The cold billionaire, the man who never smiled, the man with a heart of ice, was standing by the window with tears running down his face. His shoulders were shaking. He was trying to hide it, but he could not. "Who are you?" he whispered. His voice was broken. Elena did not understand the question. "I am Elena Vasquez, your housekeeper." Richard shook his head. "No, that is not who you are." "That is what you do." "I'm asking who you really are." "Where did you learn to play like that?" "That was not amateur playing. That was the playing of someone who was trained, someone who was gifted." Elena looked down at her hands, the hands that had once been her greatest treasure, the hands that had been destroyed by a drunk driver 22 years ago. "It is a long story," she said quietly. "I have time," Richard said. He walked over and sat down in a chair near the piano. He wiped his face with his hand, not embarrassed about his tears. "Tell me." Elena took a deep breath. She had never told this story to anyone. Not the full story. It was too painful. But something about this moment, Something about the music still echoing in the room made her want to speak. My name was not always Vasquez, she began. I was born Elena Ramirez. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood in Mexico City. My family had no money. We lived in a small house with a leaky roof. But we had one thing. We had an old piano that my grandmother had saved for 30 years to buy. She paused, remembering. I started playing when I was 4 years old. No one taught me. I just sat down and started making music. My grandmother said I was born with a gift. Richard listened without speaking. When I was 17, I won a scholarship to study at Juilliard. Do you know what that is? Richard nodded. The best music school in America? Yes, I left Mexico and went to New York. I was so scared and so excited. For 4 years, I studied with the best teachers. I practiced 8 hours a day. I won competitions. People started to notice me. They said I could be one of the great pianists of my generation. Elena's voice began to shake. She was getting to the hard part. When I was 21, I was invited to play at Carnegie Hall, my debut concert. The biggest night of my life. Everything I had worked for was finally coming true. She stopped. The tears were coming again. What happened? Richard asked gently. 1 week before the concert, I was in a taxi going to rehearsal. A drunk driver ran a red light. He hit our car. The driver of the taxi was killed. I almost died. And my right hand, she held it up, looking at the scars that were still visible after all these years. My hand was crushed, broken in 7 places. Richard closed his eyes. I am so sorry. The doctors saved my hand, Elena continued, but the nerves were damaged. I could not move my fingers the way I needed to. I could not play professionally anymore. My career was over before it started. She looked at the piano keys. That was the last time I played. Until tonight. The room was silent. The weight of her story hung in the air like smoke. Richard stood up slowly. He walked to the piano and looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Elena. My wife would have loved you, he said. She would have understood your pain. She knew what it was like to lose something precious. Elena nodded. She felt empty and full at the same time. Empty because she had finally let out the secret she had carried for so long. Full because, for the first time in 22 years, she had played music again. Thank you for telling me, Richard said. And thank you for playing. He turned and walked out of the room without another word. Elena sat alone at the piano. She put her hands on the keys one more time. She played a single chord. The sound filled the room and faded away. She smiled through her tears. She had not lost the music after all. It had been waiting for her all along. The weeks turned into months, and the Harrison mansion began to change. Every evening at 7 o'clock, Elena sat at the piano. Richard sat in his chair by the fireplace. And music filled the house for the first time in 3 years. At first, Elena was nervous every time she played. Her hands would shake. Her stomach would hurt. She would make mistakes and want to stop. But Richard never complained. He never criticized. He just sat and listened with his eyes closed. Slowly, Elena's confidence began to grow. Her fingers remembered more and more. The music that had been sleeping inside her for 22 years started to wake up. It was not the same as before. She would never play like she did when she was young. But it was something new, something deeper. Something shaped by pain and loss and survival. The other workers in the house noticed the change. They whispered to each other about the piano music every evening. They noticed that Mr. Harrison seemed different. He still did not smile much. He was still quiet and serious. But there was something softer in his eyes now. One evening, after Elena finished playing, Richard did not stand up and leave like he usually did. He stayed in his chair and looked at her. "Will you have tea with me?" he asked. Elena was surprised. In all the months she had worked there, she had never shared a meal or a drink with Richard Harrison. She was the housekeeper. He was the billionaire. They lived in different worlds, but she said yes. They sat in the library with cups of tea in their hands. At first, neither of them knew what to say. They were strangers who had shared something deep and personal, but they did not know each other's favorite colors or foods or books. Richard spoke first. Tell me about your daughter. Elena's face lit up. Sophia was her greatest pride. Her name is Sophia. She is 24 years old. She is in medical school, studying to become a surgeon. A surgeon, Richard repeated. That is impressive. She works so hard, Elena said. Harder than anyone I know? She wants to help people who have been hurt. People like me, whose bodies have been damaged. She wants to find ways to heal them. Richard nodded slowly. She sounds like a remarkable young woman. She is. I am so proud of her. Elena paused. I never told her the full truth about my past. She knows I was a musician once, but she does not know how good I was. She does not know about Juilliard or Carnegie Hall or the accident. I did not want her to carry my sadness. Maybe she should know, Richard said gently. Maybe she would want to know. Elena thought about this. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been protecting Sophia from something that did not need protection. Maybe her daughter deserved to know the whole story. Tell me about Mrs. Harrison, Elena said. What was she like? Richard's face changed. The hardness melted away. His eyes became soft and warm. Margaret was the kindest person I ever met, he said. She came from a wealthy family, but she never cared about money or status. She cared about people, about helping them, about making the world better. He took a sip of his tea. When I met her, I was young and angry and hungry for success. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be powerful. I wanted to prove to everyone that I was worth something. Margaret taught me that there were more important things. How did you meet? Elena asked. At a charity event. I was 25, trying to make business connections. She was playing piano for the guests. I heard her before I saw her. The music stopped me in the middle of a conversation. I walked across the room just to watch her play. Richard smiled at the memory. She was not a great pianist. She would have told you that herself. But she played with such joy. Such love. I had never seen anyone love anything so much. I fell in love with her that night. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was kind, though she was. But because of how she loved that piano. Elena understood. She knew what it was like to love music that way. To feel like it was part of your soul. We were married for 35 years, Richard continued. We could not have children. We tried everything, but it was not meant to be. So instead we gave our love to other things. To charity. To helping young people. And to music. Always music. His voice became quiet. When she got sick, the music stopped. The house became so quiet. After she died, I could not bear the silence. But I also could not bear to hear music without her. So I shut it all out. I became cold and hard and closed. I thought it would protect me from the pain. Did it? Elena asked. Richard shook his head. No, the pain was still there. It was just buried under ice. I was frozen, Elena. For 3 years I was frozen solid. He looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. You are thawing me. Your music is bringing me back to life. Elena felt tears in her eyes. She had not known that she was doing anything special. She had just been playing piano. But to Richard it was so much more. I lost myself and my dreams died, Elena said. I did not know who I was if I was not a pianist. So I became no one. I became invisible. I disappeared into my work and my daughter and my small life. You were never no one, Richard said. You were always you. The gift was always there, waiting. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who had lost everything. Two people who were finding their way back. Margaret would have loved you, Richard said quietly. She would have loved your story. She always said that the most beautiful music comes from broken places. Elena nodded. I think she was right. After that night, their evening tea became a ritual. Every night after Elena played, they would sit together and talk. They talked about music and loss and love. They talked about their pasts and their fears and their hopes. They talked about the people they had loved and lost. Slowly, they became friends. Not employer and employee, not billionaire and housekeeper. Just two lonely people who had found each other in the dark. One evening, Sofia came to visit. Elena had finally told her daughter the whole truth about her past. Sofia had cried and hugged her mother and said she wished she had known sooner. Now she wanted to meet the man who had given her mother's music back to her. Elena was nervous about the meeting, but Richard was kind and warm. He asked Sofia about medical school. He listened to her dreams and her plans. He treated her like she was important. At the end of the evening, Sofia hugged Elena goodbye. "Mom," she whispered, "I think you found something special here. And I do not just mean the piano." Elena looked across the room at Richard, who was looking at a photograph of Margaret with a small smile on his face. "Maybe I did," she said. "Maybe I did." The next morning, Elena did not want to go to work. She lay in bed and looked at the ceiling. She felt naked and exposed. Richard Harrison knew her secret now. He knew who she really was. The mask she had worn for 22 years was gone, but she had no choice. She needed the money. Sofia needed the money. So she got dressed, took the bus across the city, and walked through the iron gates of the mansion. Something was different when she arrived. Mrs. Chun met her at the door, with a strange look on her face. "Mr. Harrison wants to see you in the library," she said. Right now, Elena's heart sank. This was it. He was going to fire her. She had shown too much. She had broken too many walls. He did not want a housekeeper with a complicated past. He wanted someone simple, someone invisible. She walked to the library on shaking legs. Richard was sitting in a leather chair by the window. He was holding an old photograph in his hands. When Elena entered, he looked up. "Close the door," he said. "Sit down." Elena did as he asked. She sat in the chair across from him and waited for the bad news. But Richard did not talk about firing her. Instead, he held up the photograph. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. Elena looked at the picture. It showed a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes. She was sitting at a piano, her fingers on the keys, a smile on her face. She looked happy. She looked alive. "Is that Mrs. Harrison?" Elena asked quietly. Richard nodded. "This was taken 30 years ago. We had just gotten married. She played piano every single day. Not professionally like you. She was not trained at a conservatory. But she played with so much joy. So much love." He looked at the photograph for a long moment. Music was the center of her life. And when she played, it was the center of mine too. Elena did not know what to say. She waited. Richard set the photograph down. "When Margaret got sick, she knew she was dying. The doctors told us there was no hope. She had 6 months, maybe less." His voice became thick with emotion. "In those last months, she could not play any more. Her hands were too weak. She could barely lift a cup of tea. But every day she asked me to wheel her chair to the living room so she could look at the piano. She said it made her feel close to the music even if she could not make it." Elena felt tears in her eyes. She could imagine it so clearly. The dying woman, the silent piano, the husband who could do nothing but watch. "1 week before she died, Margaret made me promise something," Richard continued. "She made me promise that the piano would not stay silent forever. She wanted someone to play it again. Someone who really loved music. She said the piano was lonely without music. She said it needed to sing again." He looked at Elena with those dark eyes. "I tried to keep my promise. I hired piano teachers and concert pianists to come and play, but it never felt right. They played beautifully, yes, but they did not love the piano. They did not understand what it meant. After Margaret died, I stopped trying. I locked the piano away from everyone. I could not bear to hear someone play it without love." Richard stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the garden. "When I heard you play last night, I understood something," he said. "You are the person my wife was waiting for. You play with your heart, not just your hands. You understand loss. You understand what it means to love something so much that losing it almost kills you. Elena did not know what to say. Her throat was tight with emotion. Richard turned to face her. I want you to know something. I went online last night after you left. I searched for Elena Ramirez Juilliard, 2003. Do you know what I found? Elena's face went pale. Mr. Harrison. I found articles about you, Richard continued. You were famous, did you know that? Music critics said you were going to be the next great pianist. They said you played with fire and passion. They said you could make people cry with a single note. He walked closer to her. I also found articles about the accident, about how a drunk driver destroyed your career in 1 second, about how you disappeared from the music world and no one knew what happened to you. Elena looked down at her hands, the hands that had once been her greatest gift. I ran away, she said quietly. After the accident, I could not face anyone. I could not face the pity. I could not face the questions. So I changed my name when I got married. I moved to a new city. I became someone else. You became invisible, Richard said. Yes, Elena looked up at him. I thought if I hid from music, the pain would go away. But it never did. Every time I heard a piano, I felt like I was dying all over again. Richard sat back down in his chair. He leaned forward and looked at her with something she had never seen in his eyes before. Kindness. I understand, he said. When Margaret died, I became invisible too. I hid from everyone. I made myself cold and hard so no one could hurt me again. I thought if I did not let anyone close, the pain would stop. Did it work? Elena asked. Richard shook his head slowly. No, the pain is still there. It is always there. But I am learning that hiding from it does not help. The only way through pain is through it, not around it. They sat in silence for a moment. Two broken people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. I do not want to fire you, Richard finally said. I want to offer you a different job. Elena looked at him in surprise. A different job? I want you to play the piano. Every evening for 1 hour. That is your new job? You will still clean if you want. But the playing is what matters. Elena shook her head quickly. I cannot. I am not good enough anymore. My hand is damaged. I make too many mistakes. I'm not the pianist I used to be. I do not care about mistakes, Richard said. I care about music. Real music. The kind that comes from the heart. The kind my wife loved? He paused. The kind I have been missing for 3 years? Elena looked at the photograph of Margaret Harrison. The woman with the bright eyes and the happy smile. The woman who had loved a piano so much she could not bear for it to be silent. She would want this, Elena whispered. It was not a question. Yes, Richard said. She would. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about all the years she had spent running from music. All the years she had punished herself for something that was not her fault. All the years she had buried the best part of herself. Maybe it was time to stop running. Okay, she said quietly. I will try. Richard smiled. It was the first time Elena had ever seen him smile. It changed his whole face. He looked younger. He looked almost happy. Thank you, he said. Margaret would be so pleased. That evening, Elena sat at the piano again. Richard sat in his chair by the fireplace. She played for 1 hour, just like he asked. She made mistakes. Her hand cramped twice. But she kept playing, and somewhere she liked to believe Margaret Harrison was listening and smiling. 6 months had passed since Elena first played the piano in the Harrison mansion. So much had changed. The house was no longer cold and silent. Music filled its rooms every evening. Laughter could sometimes be heard in the hallways. Even the servants walked with lighter steps. Elena had changed too. She no longer hunched her shoulders or kept her eyes on the ground. She walked taller. She smiled more. The shame and sadness that had covered her for 22 years were slowly lifting away, but she was not ready for what Richard was about to ask her. It was a Tuesday morning. Elena was dusting the library when Richard walked in. He had a strange look on his face, excited and nervous at the same time. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Please sit down." Elena sat in one of the leather chairs. Her heart began to beat faster. When Richard used that serious tone, it usually meant something big. Richard sat across from her. He was holding an envelope in his hands. "I have been planning something for months. I did not want to tell you until it was finished. Now it is." He handed her the envelope. Elena opened it and pulled out a fancy card with gold letters. Her eyes went wide as she read it. "The Margaret Harrison Memorial Concert," she read out loud. "A benefit for music therapy programs. Boston Symphony Hall, one night only." She looked up at Richard in confusion. "What is this?" "It is a concert I am organizing in my wife's memory," Richard said. "The money we raise will go to music therapy programs at the hospital where Margaret spent her last days. Music helped her so much during her illness. I want to help others the same way." "That is beautiful," Elena said. "Margaret would love that." "There is more," Richard said. He leaned forward. "I want you to perform." Elena felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "What?" "I want you to play at the concert. On stage. In front of an audience." "No." The word came out immediately. Elena stood up and stepped back. "No, I cannot do that." "That is impossible." "Elena, I am not a performer anymore," she said. Her voice was shaking. "I am a housekeeper. I play for you in your living room. That is all. I cannot go on a stage in front of hundreds of people. I cannot do that." Richard stood up and walked toward her. His eyes were calm and steady. "Why not?" "Because I am not good enough." Elena's voice cracked. "Because my hand is damaged. Because I make mistakes. Because I am 43 years old and I have not performed in public since I was 21. Because the last time I was supposed to play a concert, my life was destroyed." Tears were streaming down her face now. She had not felt this scared in years. Richard did not look away. He did not tell her to calm down. He just waited until she stopped talking. "Are you finished?" he asked gently. Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. "Good, now let me tell you what I see." Richard took her hands in his. "I see a woman who has survived something terrible. I see a woman who buried her gift because she was afraid of the pain. I see a woman who has been given a second chance." "Richard, please, the accident took your career," he continued. "I cannot give that back to you. No one can. But do not let fear take the rest. Do not let one terrible night keep you hiding for the rest of your life." Elena shook her head. "You do not understand. The stage is different. Playing for you is safe. Playing for hundreds of strangers is terrifying." "I know it is," Richard said. "That is why it matters. That is why you have to do it." He let go of her hands and walked to the window. "When Margaret was dying, she told me something. She said that the things that scare us most are usually the things we need to do. She said that courage is not about feeling brave. It is about doing the thing even when you are afraid." He turned to look at Elena. Margaret was afraid to die, but she did it with grace and love and hope. She did not hide from it. She walked toward it. Elena stood in silence. Her mind was racing with fear. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice was saying something different. Maybe he is right. Maybe this is your chance. "I do not know if I can," she whispered. "You do not have to know," Richard said. "You just have to try." Elena thought about all the years she had wasted. All the years she had spent being afraid. All the years she had hidden from the things she loved most. She thought about Sophia, who had just been accepted to one of the best surgical programs in the country. Sophia had worked so hard. She had never given up, even when things were difficult. Elena wanted to be like her daughter. She wanted to be brave. She thought about Margaret Harrison, who she had never met but felt like she knew. Margaret, who had loved music so much. Margaret, who had wanted someone to play her piano again. She thought about the young woman she used to be. Elena Ramirez, the girl with fire in her fingers. The girl who had almost been great, Maybe that girl was still in there somewhere. Maybe she had been waiting all along. Okay, Elena said. The word was barely a whisper. What did you say? Richard asked. Elena took a deep breath. Her whole body was shaking, but her voice was stronger when she spoke again. I said, okay, I will do it. I will play at the concert. Richard's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He rushed forward and hugged her. It was the first time he had ever hugged her. It felt warm and safe and right. Thank you, he said. Thank you so much. Margaret would be so proud. Elena hugged him back. She was still terrified. She was still not sure she could do it. But she had said yes. She had taken the first step. The next 2 months were the hardest of Elena's life. She practiced every day for hours. Her hand hurt. Her fingers cramped. Sometimes she cried with frustration. But she did not stop. Richard hired a piano teacher to help her prepare. The teacher was a young woman named Rachel who had studied at Juilliard like Elena. At first, Rachel did not believe that Elena had once been a prodigy. But after hearing her play, she understood. You have something special, Rachel told her. Your technique is not perfect, but your heart is incredible. When you play, people feel it. Sophia came home to help her mother prepare. She sat in the room during practice sessions, cheering Elena on. She held her mother's hand when the fear got too strong. She reminded her why she was doing this. You gave up your dreams for me, Sophia said. You worked so hard to give me a good life. Now it is my turn to give something back to you. It is time for you to shine, Mom. The night before the concert, Elena could not sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode, but when she closed her eyes she did not see fear. She saw Margaret Harrison smiling at her piano. She saw Richard listening with tears in his eyes. She saw Sophia, so proud and so full of love, and she saw herself at 21, walking toward Carnegie Hall with the whole world ahead of her. Tomorrow, she would walk toward a stage again. Tomorrow she would play. The night of the concert arrived. Elena stood backstage at Boston Symphony Hall and tried to breathe. Her dress was beautiful, a deep blue that Richard had bought for her. Her hair was done perfectly. Her makeup was flawless. But inside, she was falling apart. She could hear the audience through the heavy curtain. 500 people were sitting in those seats, waiting to hear music. Waiting to hear her. She had not stood backstage like this since she was 21 years old. Since the night that never happened. The night that had been taken from her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold them still. She pressed them against her dress and tried to stop the trembling. It did not work. Mom. Elena turned around. Sophia was standing behind her, looking beautiful in a black dress. Her eyes were full of love. I am so scared, Elena whispered. What if I fail? What if I freeze? What if I cannot play? Sophia took her mother's hands. Then you will try again. And we will still love you. Nothing you do on that stage can change how proud I am of you. What if everyone laughs? Then they are fools. Sophia squeezed her hands. But they will not laugh. They will cry. They will feel. Because that is what your music does. It makes people feel. Elena pulled her daughter into a hug. They held each other for a long moment. Thank you, Elena whispered. Thank you for believing in me. Always, Mom, always. A stagehand appeared next to them. Miss Vasquez? You are on in 2 minutes. Elena's stomach dropped. This was it. There was no more time. She walked to the edge of the stage and looked out through a gap in the curtain. The audience was so big. So many faces. So many eyes that would be watching her. Then she saw Richard. He was sitting in the front row, right in the center. He was wearing a beautiful suit, and he was looking at the stage with an expression she had never seen before. Hope. Pure. Simple hope. Next to his chair, there was an empty seat with a single white rose on it. Elena knew who that seat was for. Margaret. The lights in the audience dimmed. A spotlight lit up the stage. The piano sat there, black and shining, waiting for her. This was the moment. 22 years late. But it was finally here. Elena walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely as she crossed the wooden floor. She heard nothing. She saw nothing except the piano. She sat down on the bench and looked at the keys. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was pounding in her ears. Every mistake she had ever made flashed through her mind. Every wrong note. Every stumble. Every failure. Then she thought of something Rachel had told her during practice. You are not playing to be perfect. You are playing to be honest. Play the truth. That is all that matters. Elena closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She let go of the fear. She thought about her grandmother, who had saved for 30 years to buy a piano. She thought about the little girl in Mexico City who had sat down and made music without being taught. She thought about the young woman who had traveled to America with nothing but a dream. She thought about the accident, the pain, the long years of silence, the moment Richard forced her to play again. She thought about Margaret Harrison, who had loved a piano so much she could not bear for it to be silent, who had made her husband promise to find someone to play it again. She thought about Richard, who had lost everything and found a way to keep going, who had given her a second chance when she thought her chances were over. She thought about Sophia, who was watching from the side of the stage with tears already in her eyes. Sophia, who had never given up on her. Elena opened her eyes. She put her hands on the keys and she began to play. She played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she had learned at 17. The piece she had planned to play at Carnegie Hall, the piece she had played for Richard on that first night in his living room. The music flowed out of her like water, breaking through a dam. 22 years of silence. 22 years of grief. 22 years of hiding. All of it poured through her fingers and into the keys. She made mistakes. Of course she did. Her hand cramped in the difficult passages. She hit wrong notes in places she had practiced 1,000 times. But she did not stop. She did not freeze. She kept playing because the music was bigger than the mistakes. The feeling was stronger than the fear. The truth was more important than perfection. When she reached the final section of the piece, something changed. The music became soft and tender. The notes slowed down. Elena felt tears on her face, but she did not wipe them away. She let them fall. This was not just music anymore. This was her whole life. Every joy, every sorrow, every hope, every dream, all of it compressed into sound. The last note rang out through the hall. It hung in the air for a long, beautiful moment. Then it faded into silence. Elena sat at the piano with her hands in her lap. She was afraid to look up, afraid to see the audience, afraid to know what they thought. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then someone stood up. It was Richard Harrison. He was on his feet and tears were streaming down his face. He was not trying to hide them. He was not embarrassed. He just stood there, crying openly, and began to clap. The woman next to him stood up. Then the man behind her. Then a whole row. Then another row. The applause built like a wave. It rolled through the audience, growing louder and louder. People were standing everywhere now. The entire hall was on its feet. Elena finally looked up. She saw 500 people applauding her. She saw tears on many faces. She saw Sophia running onto the stage, not caring about rules, throwing her arms around her mother. You did it, Sophia cried. Mom, you did it. Elena hugged her daughter and cried. All the years of pain and fear and hiding were washing away. She had done the thing that scared her most. And she had survived. Later, backstage, Richard found her alone. Sophia had gone to get water, and the crowd had finally stopped congratulating her. Elena was sitting in a chair, still in her beautiful blue dress, staring at nothing. Richard sat down next to her. He did not say anything for a long moment. He just sat there, his presence warm and comforting. Margaret would have loved that, he finally said. His voice was thick with emotion. She would have loved every second. Elena looked at him. Do you really think so? I know so. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She left something for me before she died. A letter. She told me to give it to the person who finally played her piano again. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting." He handed her the envelope. Elena opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single piece of paper with elegant handwriting. "Dear friend, if you are reading this, you have done something wonderful. You have brought music back into our home. You have played the piano I loved so much. You have filled the silence with sound. I do not know who you are or what your story is, but I know you must be special. I know you must love music the way I do. I know you must have courage. Thank you. Thank you for giving Richard something to believe in again. Thank you for keeping my piano alive. Thank you for not letting the music die. Wherever you go from here, remember this. You are worthy. Your music is worthy. Your story is worthy. Play on. With love, Margaret Harrison." Elena read the letter 3 times. By the end, she was crying so hard she could barely see. Richard put his arm around her. "She knew," he said quietly. "She knew someone like you would come. She was waiting for you." 6 months later, Elena Vasquez was no longer a housekeeper. She was the director of the Margaret Harrison Music Therapy Foundation. She spent her days teaching children from poor neighborhoods how to play piano. She showed them that talent does not die. It waits. It is patient. It will come back when you are ready. Every Sunday evening, she went to Richard's mansion. She sat at the Steinway Concert Grand and played for an audience of 1. Richard would sit in his chair by the fireplace, eyes closed, a small smile on his face. Sometimes Sophia would visit and listen too. Sometimes other friends would come. But mostly, it was just Elena and Richard and the piano and the ghost of a woman who had loved music more than anything. One Sunday, after Elena finished playing, Richard looked at her with gratitude in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I thought my life was over when Margaret died. I thought I would never feel anything again. I was wrong. What changed?" Elena asked. Richard smiled. "You walked into my house and pretended you could not play piano. And then you played and everything changed." Elena laughed. It was a sound that had been rare for 22 years. Now she laughed every day. "I did not pretend," she said. "I just forgot. I forgot who I really was. And now?" Elena looked at the piano, the beautiful instrument that had brought her back to life. The piano that had been waiting for her all along. "Now I remember," she said. "And I will never forget again." The end.